Proverbs 18, verses 13 to 24, the overall counsel is that listening paves the way for peace. In verse 13, he who gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame to him. So much conflict in our relationships could be avoided if we just listen first, before we make assumptions or jump to conclusions. It's so tempting to think we understand exactly what's going on in this situation and we know why this person said this or did this. We're very good at telling ourselves stories about what really happened, but those stories may be completely inaccurate. And if we act on those false stories, it can cause so many problems in our relationships. On the other hand, in verse 14, a good listener can heal a broken spirit. People dealing with physical sickness can get through it as long as they have the will to live. But someone who's depressed and downtrodden may want to give up on life altogether. But someone willing to listen to them can let them know they are loved and valued. In verse 5, wise people have their ears always open, ready to listen to other wise people so that they can gain more knowledge and understanding. In verse 16, a wise person knows how to make others more willing to listen to them. Typically, if we appear before someone great, like some political leader, they're way too busy to listen to us, and they've got more important things to do. Why should they even give us a hearing? But if we come bringing a gift, it's a gesture of not only generosity, but of politeness and respect that opens the door to gain a hearing, even from people in power. And in verse 17, it's so important to listen to both sides and consider all perspectives in a dispute. This is true in a court of law, but also in our own relationships. That if we're trying to mediate a dispute between two people, one person makes a case and says, hey, this guy offended me, and it sounds so convincing, and you walk away thinking the other guy is the bad guy, until you actually listen to that supposed bad guy's story, and then you realize it's the first guy that was really in the wrong. But this works even if we have no mediator, because when someone offends me or hurts me, I can make a great case to myself about why they're such a terrible person, but I need to be willing to hear their side of the story and understand their perspective on what happened. And if you listen to both perspectives and you still can't come to a decision about who's in the right or who's in the wrong here, well, that's when you turn to God in verse 18 for wisdom. Back then, they would cast lots to determine God's will in a matter, and we don't do that today, but we have church leaders, we have God's word, we still have prayer, asking God for wisdom, because we recognize even when we listen, there's a limit to our understanding of a situation, and we need God to weigh in on the situation and to help us make peace. And it's so important to make peace in verse 19, because when we're offended, we put up walls, and those walls can become like a prison that keeps us separated so that we're cut off from our relationship with one another. And once those walls go up, it's so hard to bring them back down again. And listening can go a long way to lowering those defenses. And once you listen and you have a clear understanding of the situation, then when you speak, your words will bring healing and satisfaction both to you and to the hearer. And so in verse 20, you'll be satisfied with the fruit of your mouth, and your tongue will bring life to those around you. And I can't prove this, but perhaps verse 22 is there because Solomon knows the key to finding a good wife is to be a good listener. In verse 23, sometimes it's the rich who are the worst listeners because they're not in a position of needing other people. And so they talk down to people and treat people rudely, whereas poor people are in a humble position of recognizing their need. And finally, in verse 24, you can have a lot of people that call themselves your friends, but they may not actually care enough to listen to you. With friendship, quality is way more important than quantity. And it's better to have one friend who actually listens to you and sticks close to you in your time of need than to have hundreds of friends who pay you no attention at all. And so the challenge for us in our relationships is before we say or do anything, listen first. Stephen Covey wrote a famous book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the way he words it is seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. The way James puts it in James 1:19 is everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And I think there's a direct connection there between being quick to hear and slow to anger. Because the reason we get so angry with people is because we've told ourselves a story about why they said what they said or did what they did, and that story infuriates us. But when you're quick to hear, most of the time it shows us we've completely misunderstood the situation and our story was fabricated, and the anger subsides completely. Remember, Satan is the father of lies, and if he can lie to us and get us to believe a false story about our brethren or about our siblings or our spouse, he can drive a wedge between us and create massive relational conflicts and get everybody putting up their walls and locking themselves in behind the bars of their own defenses. But if we can listen and really seek to understand this person and where they're coming from and what they were really thinking, those walls will come down and you will have paved the way for peace. And this points to Christ because, of course, he was a great listener. And rather than going around lecturing everyone, he was so good at asking people questions to get their perspective and to understand their story and give them an opportunity to tell it. And it was so disarming to people, and it opened people up to his teaching. And this gets even more amazing if we zoom out from a big picture perspective, because look what God did in sending Jesus into the world. When Jesus took on human flesh, he was seeking to understand before being understood. He was listening to us first to find out, what is it like to be a human being living in fleshly bodies in a sin-cursed world? What does it mean to experience suffering and to feel like your Father in heaven has abandoned you and to have to resist constant temptation to sin by the devil? Before Jesus came to teach us his word, he listened by putting on flesh so he could understand where we were coming from in this conflict with God. And that's why Jesus' ministry was so disarming to us and lowers our walls and makes us receptive to him. It's because we know he gets us. He understands how hard it is not to sin. He understands the pain and the suffering and the heartache and the injustice and the confusion of living in this broken world. And that in turn makes us want to understand him and to listen to his teaching. And ironically, we were not great men and women at all, and yet Jesus still came bearing a gift. In the greatest act of kindness and generosity, he gave himself to us as the gift that opened the door and paved the way for us to want to listen to him even more passionately. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 9:15, "Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift." So as we call on God for wisdom, our prayer today is, Father, thank you for being a God who is quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger. Thank you for sending Jesus in the flesh to show us you understand us. Help me to listen and to seek to understand others the way Jesus did, even if it's painful and sacrificial, because Jesus shows me listening to others to pave the way for peace is worth any cost.